I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think CrinEar is the biggest news story of 2025, at least in the world of personal audio. Critical making his own brand of IEMs, I feel like it's going to be game-changing going forward. But up until now, we've just got the Meta, and Critical only made 1,000 of those things. So only 1,000 people really know, like, is this real or is it hype? And that brings us to this. This is the CrinEar Daybreak. This is the second ever IEM from CrinEar, and I feel like this IEM not only makes CrinEar real, I actually like this one better than the Meta. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Reveal. And today we're taking a look at the CrinEar Daybreak. It's actually coming in at a price lower than the Meta at $170, which I think is a pretty competitive price for what you get. It is a tribrid IEM with a single dynamic driver, 2 balanced armatures, and 2 microplanar for the tweeters. And well, I feel like there's going to be a lot of comparisons to the Meta. I will get into how this thing compares with the Meta, but also to some degree, it's like, you can't buy the Meta, so who cares? I think just zooming out, over the past year or so, there have been a lot of IEMs in this new Meta category that have all had kind of different balances between the mid-range, lower mid-range, the treble, and the bass. And I feel like I'm pretty confident saying I think this is the best balance yet. But does that make it a perfect IEM? Well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to the CrinEar Meta, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. But before we get into that, though, a quick shout out to Hangout Audio for sending this IEM in for review. If you want to check out the CrinEar Daybreak, I'll have a link to them down below, although I will also note it's not exclusive to Hangout Audio. You can also find it on Amazon. I think it's going to be on other retailers as well. But with that said, let's go to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box of the Daybreak. We'll talk about the physical form factor, build quality, fit and comfort, all that stuff. And then of course, we're going to talk about the sound here on this IEM, how it compares with, yes, the Meta, but also just, I've got actually 6 other IEMs that I'm going to compare this thing with. So if this ends up running long, I apologize, but I'm going to try and get through this stuff quickly. So here you go. Here is the packaging, the box of the CrinEar Daybreak. Fairly large box, to be honest, for an IEM, but what you get inside is actually kind of nice for a sub $200 IEM. I guess I'll put this to the side for now and just show you the little carry case, which is a leatherette carry case. It's got a magnet on it. And yeah, this is bigger than I usually prefer because it's not really pocketable, but I like that it's square and boxy, and I feel like I could stack it. If all IEMs came in this, I would be happy with. But yeah, it's a nice little package. You can see it's got kind of a soft touch material on the inside, but that is enough talking about the case. Let me put that to the side. The other stuff that you get inside it is, of course, sets of ear tips. You get just one size of silicone ear tips and then one set of silicone ear tips, one style, and then also a set of foam ear tips. I think it's notable that I'm actually using these silicone ear tips. Usually the silicone ear tips, I don't know, I swap ear tips a lot of the times, and I'll be honest with this IEM, I did swap a bunch before finally testing out the stock ear tips and actually realizing that I think these ones were the best for me. Although you'll notice I'm using the small. We'll talk about why, because it has to do with the fit. But apart from that, you get, of course, the IEM. We're going to talk about the build quality next, but just to highlight briefly, you do get a swappable termination on this. So you can use a 3.5 mil if you're based, or you can use a 4.4 mil balance connector if you like to try really hard with your audio. Sorry, that wasn't nice. You can use 4.4 if you want. It's got the nice screw-on method, which I like. So it holds on. It's at a right angle, which is actually kind of unique for these swappable terminations. And it's also fairly compact, so I dig that. All right, the rest of the cable, build quality and stuff on this, let me just say, I think it's a decent cable, but it is a little bit on the stiff and kind of kink prone side. I'll just give you a demonstration, right? You do one of those, which is probably not how most people use their IEMs, but you can see that it ends up kind of retaining some memory of that kinkiness. Now, the plus side is that it works out pretty easily, but it is nonetheless a little bit on the stiff, kind of thin and wiry side, I suppose, but generally behaves actually pretty well. Again, you notice that it worked itself out. I'll give it the rotary wrap to just show you that it does lie nice and flat. That's what we like to see. And well, the rest of the hardware is also nice and compact. I showed you that the termination is nice and compact. You also have a very small Y split. You have a chin slider that it kind of stays in place just by virtue of this being somewhat of a, I don't know, we call it like a knotty braid. It's probably not the right word, but there you go. It does end up staying in place kind of, but also you can kind of see it doesn't really. So we'll give that not really a pass. But apart from that, you do get, of course, your standard preformed ear hooks, as well as a standard 2-pin connector with a very mild protrusion on it, which fits in well with the IEM because it has a 2-pin connector, of course, with a slight recess on it. So if you're looking for other IEM cables to swap onto this, it's going to be compatible with most of them. But if you happen to have a cable that has a completely flush connector, right, if it has zero protrusion like this one has a little bit, it might be a problem, but I don't know. I can't really think of many cables that I have that would not work well with this. And then this cable is going to work well with other cables or with other IEMs as well. But that will bring us to talking about the earpieces here on the Daybreak. Let me turn them both to the side so you can see that they do have different designs. You have CrinEar on one side and Daybreak on the other. Aesthetically, I'm going to say it's not my favorite. I think I felt the same way about the Meta, although at least the Meta had kind of this cool, like, coppery color to it here. You can see that the chamfering and the engraving is more of a silver color. So it doesn't look bad, but it also doesn't look maybe quite as nice as the Meta looked. But it's also just, it's kind of a little bit plain looking. I don't know. I think it actually is going to be counterintuitive. Might look cooler with the lettering blacked out. But anyway, the outside panel is quite simple. I don't think it's going to turn anybody off. And then the rest of the earpiece is, as you can see, kind of a semi-custom, pretty highly molded shell. If you are familiar with wearing IEMs like this one is on the slightly more opinionated side, although I'll give you a fit demonstration in a bit. It's also a little bit on the smaller side. It's like, I'm gonna call it a medium small. Not like full small, but it's definitely smaller than most semi-custom IEMs. And well, it's gonna mean that it probably works well for more people, although given that it does have somewhat of a more aggressive mold to it, just note that that might be a limit for other people. Okay, apart from that, one thing you might have noticed as I'm turning this thing around is that while it does have a metal panel on the outside, the shell itself is not metal. It is cast out of a solid resin, as far as I can tell. And you can see that it is semi-translucent, so it does have like a smokiness to it. And if you look really hard, you can see drivers in there. But I'm gonna say that for the most part, don't expect to see much of the drivers in here. You're gonna have to take like a flashlight to it to be able to see much of what's going on inside of there, because it is a pretty dark, smoky shell. But nonetheless, it's a cool effect. And overall, the earpieces are still actually surprisingly lightweight, given that they are a solid resin. But maybe that's just partly because it is so small. Let me highlight real quickly before I throw this thing into my ear what the nozzle looks like, which is, I'm gonna say a little bit on the long side actually, which is why I'm actually using the small ear tips. I mentioned that I'm using smalls. Typically my size of ear tip is, I don't know, I more often average a medium ear tip, but when I have a longer nozzle like this, I find that going with a smaller ear tip just allows it to fit deeper into my ear canal, and that ended up being what worked out well here with the Daybreak. Okay. Now, of course, for you nozzle peepers, we got to measure this nozzle and see exactly what we're looking at. And it is about 5.3 millimeters at the kind of the bottom area here, but you can see there's a little bit of a lip. So let me measure the lip briefly. I believe it's basically 6 millimeters, but yeah, it's basically just about 6 millimeters, maybe even a little bit smaller here at the outside. So size-wise, I would say that this is, you know, not the smallest nozzle, but I don't think it's going to be an issue for most people, apart from the fact that it does fit a little bit on the deep side, so just take that into consideration. I feel like the deeper the fit of an IEM, the more a wider nozzle matters, right? And more having a narrow nozzle is helpful. But I digress. So let's actually put the thing in my ear. Let's just do the thing. So talk about fit and comfort. Yeah, fit stability on this thing is actually pretty fantastic. Like I mentioned, you can kind of see here, it is, I'm gonna say, a medium small shell. So I think this is gonna fit into most people's ears pretty well. And because it has a fairly opinionated semi-custom design, it's gonna be pretty stable, pretty secure. And it's kind of what you want out of an IEM. I will say that the semi-aggressive molding on like that wing on the back of the earpiece, let me grab the other one to kind of highlight it. This guy right here is a little bit on the aggressive side, so that could be a limit for long-term comfort, but I'll say that like most IEMs, this is an IEM I had no problem going to sleep with, waking up with it in my ear still. So comfort, fit stability, I'm generally pretty happy with here on the Daybreak, although maybe, again, that aggressiveness might be the only limitation there for me. But anyway, yeah, generally a nicely built IEM. I feel like, yeah, if I was going to daily drive this thing, the cable's not bad, but I feel like it is a little bit on the stiff and wiry side, and I would be tempted to replace it. But it's probably enough of me talking about the build quality in this IEM. So let's talk about how the Daybreak sounds. And of course, we're going to go over to SquigLink, take a look at the frequency response graph, which I have up on SquigLink, linked in the description down below. If you want to compare the Daybreak to literally hundreds of other IEMs that I've measured, well, I've got it linked down there. But of course, we can talk about it here together. To highlight this darker gray line back here, that's my neutral target. And let's ignore this bottom half for now. And just, do you still see the darker dotted gray line? Because I don't. It's basically entirely covered by the frequency response here of the Daybreak, which means that it's basically from 80 hertz and above, this is just a neutral sound signature. This is very much in line with the new meta sound signature, the tilted diffuse field sound signature, all these different things you've heard. You could call it the Super 22 sound signature. But anyway, I digress, because this is just generally a nice, well-tuned, neutral sound signature. I mentioned that of all the new metal IEMs, there have been kind of like various degrees of like how much upper mid-range versus less upper mid-range, how much treble, less treble. Do you want to, like the MegaFest has a little bit of a boost of treble here. Some of them have different bass boosts. I think this is the best balance yet. This one to me sounds the most neutral. And what I like about this is it ends up sounding very mid-range forward. I'm going to get into my listening impressions, I guess, in a little bit, but just to stick on the tone, it sounds very mid-range forward. It sounds kind of low contrast in a way, so it's not like an aggressive sound signature. It has somewhat of an ease, a little bit of a warmth to it, but it's not like a stuffy warm, and it's just not like a high contrast sound. It's a low contrast chill sound, which I will briefly mention, like versus the meta. I'm going to bring in the meta. We're going to do a whole big comparison here in a little bit, but versus the meta, if you're curious about, is this just a meta at a cheaper price that everyone can buy? It's not, because it's different than the meta. Sound signature wise, the meta is more of a contrasty sound. Sounds a little bit more V in a sense. I think the bass and the treble especially sound a little bit sharper and tighter. And this one sounds a little bit more low contrast and relaxed. And I think that's part of why I like this one better. So yeah, let me bring up my notes and we will talk about my personal listening impressions. I mean, I think that tonality that I described is basically spot on, which is probably what you should expect when you see a red line covering up my dotted gray line. I'm probably going to tell you that I think the tonality is very good, which means everything to me sounds very natural. Sounds in its right place. It doesn't sound contrasty. It doesn't sound like the mid-range is hidden. The vocals are very well represented here on the Daybreak. And, you know, you don't have like it's just kind of like a nice, easy listen. I think the vocal texturing, which is a thing that's important to me, and it's part of why I like this low contrast mid-range sound signature, is above average here on the set. And you get that without having a very aggressive treble. Like sibilance is basically non-existent on the set. It does a really good job of dealing with that. Now, it's not going to be like a high clarity sound, right? Again, this is kind of a low contrast sound signature, so it's not going to create like this real strong sense of clarity and incisiveness about it. But it's also not stuffy sounding. I think it just sounds kind of right to me. The things maybe that are not perfect about the sound, however, really have nothing to do with the mid-range, and it's more to do with kind of the extremes of the bass and the treble. So let me talk about that for a little bit. The bass, I think, is not that tight. It's not bad, but it's not that tight. I'd say that the bass is probably maybe a little bit better than the bass we got on the MegaFest as an example, but it's still not like the tightest, punchiest, slammiest bass, which you don't need a lot of bass to do that. All right, there are IEMs out there that have nice, slammy, tactile, physical bass that don't have a big bass boost, even have less of a bass boost than we get here on the Daybreak. But I feel like the bass is just, that's not what this thing is excelling at. I would also say that in the very upper treble, at least that's kind of where I'm attributing it, is in the upper treble. Maybe it's actually somewhere else, but there is kind of like a slight wispiness to the sound. It's not like a sharpness. It's not a fatiguingness. It just has like kind of a light, almost indistinctness about it, right? It doesn't have quite the bite and definition that I get on other treble performances. And again, we'll bring in some other IEMs for comparison to hopefully put that into context. But to me, like the visual analogy, when I'm thinking of what this treble reminds me of, is it feels like like cotton candy. You're like pulling it apart, and there's just like this kind of like light wispiness about it, right? It just kind of lacks a little bit of definition. But these are honestly pretty small complaints in the grand scheme of things, because again, that tonality is just right. And again, I think versus all of the other IEMs in this genre, this new meta genre, which has been birthed in the last year or so, I feel like this is really hitting that tonal balance, I think, the best. So let me, it's just really not going to blow you away in terms of the technical performance. So let's just put it that way. I think tonal balance is spot on. Technical performance is solid. Like imaging is decent, but it's not going to blow you away. But let me, put it into context by bringing in a host of other competitors. And because there's so many IEMs here, and look at this. This is a mess. Because there's so many IEMs here, I don't want to go through one by one and compare them. Instead, I wanted to go through kind of a handful of categories and rank them. I'm going to stack rank them in these categories so you have a good idea of the different trade-offs of these IEMs. And this is just kind of an important thing to understand about audio, is that most things are not necessarily strictly better or worse. I get this a lot when people are asking for upgrades of things. Usually things are not strictly better and worse. There's just trade-offs, right? Do you want the most tactile bass? Well, you might not have the most refined or easy treble, for example. So let's talk about how these things stack up, and you can kind of make up your own mind in terms of what these trade-offs are and what makes sense for you. So of course, we've got, the Daybreak here, $170, Tribrid IEM, 1+2+2. Here we've got actually the binary Chopin. Remember this one? It's about $200. Hybrid set, 1 dynamic driver, I believe 3 balanced armatures. Over here we've got the EPZ P50, which I'm going to say right now, I think it is eerily similar to the Daybreak in terms of physical stuff. Sound differences are here, however, and we're going to talk about that. But this is, well, the price on this is actually kind of hard to nail down. I'm going to call it around $200. Also, a single dynamic driver, 2 balanced armatures, 2 microplanars. Told you they were similar. Over here, we've got the Zigat Lush, which is $180, I believe. 1 dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures. Here, of course, we've got the CrinEar Pure, which is the cheapest of the bunch by far at $90. 1 dynamic driver, 3 balanced armatures. Here we've got the Kiwi Ears KE4, which is $200. 1 dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures. No, sorry, I got that wrong. 2 dynamic drivers, 2 balanced armatures. This is a 2+2. And then finally, we've got the CrinEar Meta, which is, it's priceless. You can't buy this right now. And what's the driver configuration? We still don't know. He's keeping it a secret, and I think that's fine. But anyway, so that's kind of what we're taking a look at. I'm gonna probably zoom out. I apologize if this gets a little out of focus, but we got to make room for what's going on here on this table. All right, the first way I want to rank these is just in terms of tonality. I talked about that tonal balance that I think the Daybreak gets just right. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I think this is the best tonal balance of the bunch. So I'm going to put it up number 1. After that, you might be surprised. I'm actually going to give it to the CrinEar Pure. It's definitely a warmer, slightly stuffier sound, but it just ends up hitting just right for me. So I really like that. Next up, I'm probably going to give it to the Meta in terms of tonal balance. I would say that this is my next favorite of the bunch, followed by, I'm checking my notes just to make sure that like I'm consistent with myself. I'd say the KE4. You know, this is again more of a contrasty sound signature versus this, a little bit more mid-rangey. I end up preferring the more mid-rangey sound signature. Some people will prefer this, a little bit more V-shaped sound signature. The KE4 is kind of similar to the Meta. It's also a little bit more contrasty. It's got more treble bite to it, and also just a whole lot more bass to it, which some people are definitely going to like. But for me, I'm going to put it there. Next up, I'm probably going to give to the Chopin, which is the most different of the bunch here. It's actually kind of out of place in a way, because this is definitely not new meta tune. This is very close to Harman tuning, but it's Harman tuning with a lot more warmth than you expect, a lot more bass. I've got it here on the table because it's around $200 and a hybrid set. So I feel like it's something you should probably be considering if you're also thinking about the Daybreak. But in terms of tonal balance, I definitely prefer the new meta. It just sounds more natural and normal. This sounds slightly V-shaped sound signature in a way, but also kind of warm and bassy, and it's pleasant that way. Next up, I'm actually probably going to give to the EPZ P50. Okay, this is, yeah, I gotta zoom out even more. But the EBZ P50, also pretty in line with the new Meta sound signature, but it ends up sounding, I think, more contrasty, a little bit more V-shaped than even the new Meta. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. And then finally is the ZGOT Lush, which is also new Meta-ish, but it's the most warm and like laid back. Like the upper mid range is quite laid back. Vocals are very much in the back. I don't know. The vocals are very relaxed on this set, and it sounds a little bit warm and a little bit stuffy and a little bit boxy. And because of that, this will be my least favorite in terms of tonal balance. So hopefully you followed that chain of reasoning there, and you have a good sense of how they differ in terms of tonal balance. But let's talk about them in terms of also bass physicality. We're going to get into some of these like more technical terms, I suppose. Not that the terms are necessarily technical, but they're terms that we call technical. So bass physicality, which is just kind of a thing that makes an IEM, even if like the tonality isn't perfect, can make it engaging and really fun in a way. And honestly, I'm going to put the Chopin up at #1. This has, I think, the best bass of the bunch. It's just got this nice tight punchiness about it. It's not really overbearing. Like, I don't find it to be bloomy and soft. It is, in fact, well-defined, and it's just a lot of fun, a very engaging bass. And to be honest, I'm gonna rank the other ones below this, but I feel like there's gonna be like a couple of steps below this. Like, this is just by far the best bass on the table here. But the next step I would probably say is the Meta, which is not the most defined in terms of its like initial attack, but it has, I think, the best sub bass presentation, which gives it a little bit of a tightness. It depends on what you're listening to, actually. Certain kick drums and stuff do sound maybe a little bit soft on the Meta, even versus some of these others, but overall, I did find that the bass physicality in the Meta was probably my next favorite. Follow up by that, you might be surprised, is probably the P50. I think that contrastiness that both of these exhibit contributes to having just a slightly more incisive and more felt physical sensation to that bass. Next up, I'm going to give it to Kiwi Ears KE4. Although I don't know, this one's a bit of a, it's too much bass for me. It can get to be kind of bloomy, but it can also have like a nice physicality and impact behind it. So for me, I don't know that it's necessarily my fourth favorite bass, but if you're just talking about bass physicality and like how well you feel it, the KE4 is definitely up there. Beyond that, honestly, like the Lush, I was kind of surprised by this because I remember the bass in the Lush sounding a little bit bloomy and soft, and it still is, especially compared to these ones. But there is, with kick drums specifically, like it does have a pretty decent physicality and punch to it. The sub bass is a little bit drony on that, but it is what it is. And that will finally leave us with these two down here, actually, where I put these as like my favorite in terms of the tonal balance. In terms of the bass physicality, I think they're actually probably the weakest. And there's an argument that the Pure is actually maybe even a little bit better than the Daybreak in terms of that physicality. Again, I think in terms of like that kick drum, if you're looking for you want to know like the track that I use a lot for a lot of this stuff is Men I Trust. They did a live album earlier this year. They have a track called Oh Dove, and it's just got a really satisfying, fun kick drum to it. That it's not the only thing I was comparing the physicality on these things, but if you want to be able to interpret what I'm talking about with these, try out that track, and I think you'll get a good idea. I actually think the Pure probably had a better physicality behind it than the Daybreak, although they're pretty close. Again, it's just not where these two IEMs are stand out. Another thing that we can talk about is treble incisiveness and like imaging, and I have these as two different categories, but there's definitely going to be some overlap here. I'm just going to stick with like how incisive the treble is, how sharp it is, and like how well defined are each, kind of like the transient attack of each instrument, which can contribute to a better sense of imaging, just feeling like there's more separation between the sounds. And well, a lot of it's going to come from more of the contrasty sound signatures, as you're probably going to see here as we lay them out. In terms of treble incisiveness and transient attack, I think the Meta is going to be the most defined here of the bunch. The next up, honestly, is probably going to be the KE4, although this one's also a little bit of a wash because it does have a bit of that bass bloom as an issue, which can reduce that transient attack more in like kind of like the lower mid-range especially. But specifically, we're talking about treble transients. I think they are a little bit sharper here on the KE4 than most other things. The next up, I'm going to give it to the Chopin. The Chopin, it's got really nice bass and also has like a nice incisive treble that's not fatiguing. And I think that contributes to this just having a really nice sense of imaging and a sense of space versus, frankly, most of these new meta sound signatures, while Harman Target is kind of, I don't want to say it's on the way out because people love Harman Target, obviously. It's not as maybe new and exciting for a lot of people, but I feel like this execution of it shows that there's definitely a reason why this is a popular sound signature, and this warm version of it I really do quite like. Next up, I'm going to say in terms of treble incisiveness, probably the P50 can have a nice contrastiness about it. It does also have kind of like a similar lightness to the upper treble, I suppose, but there's more of a glare on kind of like the lower treble, which gives it more of that slightly contrasty and more incisive sound. But at this point, I feel like these three are just kind of heads and tails above the rest in terms of that sense of incisiveness. The next up I would say is probably the Daybreak. Not too far behind the P50 in terms of that, but it is less contrasty overall, and I think because of that, it does sound a little bit softer and a little bit less incisive, which is what we're ranking here. And then finally, I'm actually gonna say that the Pure beats the Lush. The Lush is, to me, just like the softest, kind of fuzziest sound signature of the bunch. It's also gonna be the easiest. You could like invert this. If you're looking for the IEM that has the easiest treble, like the least fatiguing treble, you could basically just invert this list and have that as your result. So there's that. And now, I mentioned that the incisiveness and imaging basically overlap. The one little tweak here is I'll put Chopin as the best. I think the Chopin does have the strongest sense of imaging. I think that bass is just giving a lot of depth to the stereo image on the Chopin. And then other than that, like this order is more or less basically the same. So I don't know. That's kind of how all these IEMs stack up and compare. Again, in terms of the tonal balance, that's where I feel like the Daybreak really stands out, and it is my favorite of the bunch. In terms of everything else, it's mixed bag. And again, there's trade-offs.
Editor Mark here, and I'm realizing as I'm putting this video together that I kind of teased you. Kind of on purpose, but not intentionally. Like, I didn't tell you what my overall ranking of those IEMs were. Just, I ranked them in terms of different categories, but I didn't tell you in terms of my preference. I did it intentionally because the point of that ranking was to show you that there are trade-offs and you might have your own preferences, but of course I have my own preferences, and I feel like it is maybe a little bit of a tease to not tell you what my preferences are. So I'm gonna tell you how I would rank them just in terms of overall my preference. Like, which ones am I likely to be spending more time with over the coming year? And it might surprise you. At the bottom, this one's probably not that surprising. It's gonna be the Zigot Lush for me. It's just a little bit too warm, a little bit too stuffy. It's not bad, but it's overall, and it also doesn't really fit me very well. So for those reasons, that's probably at the bottom. I would say that my next is probably gonna be the EPZ P50, which is also not a bad IEM. It has a nice contrastiness. It's satisfying, but in this competition, it just doesn't really stand out for me. Above that, I would probably put the Kiwi Ears KE4, which has a little bit too much bass for me, but it does also have kind of a nice, fun physicality about it, so I do enjoy that much. But yeah, that's probably where I would put the KE4. Next up is probably actually going to be the Meta. The Meta is a very nice fitting IEM. It has a nice contrasty bit about it, and it's kind of similar to the KE4, but just has better bass. So I like the Meta better personally, which leaves, I think, 3 other ones, which might not be the ones that you were expecting to be near the top of my list. But I would say the next one's probably gonna be the Daybreak, all right? It's not in my top 2, which again, might surprise you, but I do like the Daybreak, and I think it is just overall the best tonality of the bunch, but it's not necessarily the most tactile and physical, which is at least half of what I like to listen to. So the next one would be maybe surprising, but I actually like the binary Chopin. It's that bass physicality. Again, it's more of a Harman tune, so it's not what I'm gonna go to for like my vocal reference, I suppose, but it is pretty fun and satisfying to listen to, and it's one that I do pull out every once in a while just to remind myself about that bass, which leaves maybe the most surprising of all. The Truthier Pure, I think, is my favorite of the bunch. Like, it's kind of like, it's too warm, and it's not like the most spacious, but there is something about it. It kind of reminds me of, it's not the same as the Symphonium Meteor, but there's a thing about it that's kind of like Meteor-like, where it's just a little bit laid back, a little bit chill, and wholly satisfying in a way that, yeah, I feel like over the next year, making a prediction about myself, probably the Pure will be my most listened to. But let's wrap up this review.
In some ways, the Daybreak is kind of like a modern day Etymotic ER2 XR. If you remember the Etymotic ER2, this one actually fits a lot better than the Etymotic, by the way. But it was just like this nice tonal balance or tonal benchmark at an affordable price that wasn't the most technical sounding IEM, but was nonetheless still one of the best IEMs that you can get at that price. And I feel like the Daybreak is just the modern day interpretation of that idea. For me, out of 5 stars, this is a very solid 4-star IEM. And if you want to check it out, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked in the description down below. And I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Joined with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.